Welcome to another episode of Rock, Shovels, and Manuscripts. I'm Rick, and this is Steve. Hi, Steve. Was that a hi? Or
Hi,
Rick. Okay, now, you talked about this really cool mechanism called the Antikythera.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious about more about this. What else do you know?
Well, as I said in a previous episode, it's over 1,000 years old. It's made out of at least 30 bronze gears. 30 gears. And it calculates astronomical positions and data. Let me read to you from an article about this device.
Okay.
I'm just going to quote it. The front dial is just clean enough to say exactly what it did. It has two scales, one of which is fixed and displays the names of the signs of the zodiac. The other is on a movable slip ring and shows the months of the year. Both scales are carefully marked off in degrees. The front dial fitted exactly over the main driving wheel, which seems to have turned the pointer by means of an eccentric drum assembly. Clearly, this dial showed the annual motion of the sun in the zodiac, by means of key letters inscribed on the zodiac scale corresponding to the other letters on the calendar plate. It also showed the main risings and settings of bright stars and constellations throughout the year. The back dials are more complex but less legible. The lower one had 3 slip rings and the upper had 4. Each had a little subsidiary dial resembling the seconds dial of a watch. Each of the large dials is inscribed with lines about every 6 degrees, and between the lines there are letters and numbers. On the lower dial, the letters and numbers seem to record moon so many hours, sun so many hours, basically daylight savings time. They knew how long a day was going to last. We therefore suggest that this scale indicates the main lunar phenomena of phases and times of rising and setting. On the upper dial, the inscriptions are much more crowded and might well present information on the risings and settings, stations, and retrogrades of the planets which were known to the Greeks: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So this device was an astronomy professor in your hand. You turn this device, it would tell you how long the day would last, when the sun would come up, when the sun would go down, what phase of the moon it would be in, where the constellation would be in the sky, when it would show up, when it would go down, and it was accurate for the entire year. But not just for the year. You could set this dial back 10 years or forward 10 years, and it would tell you what it's going to be like also.
Okay, now give me a date on this again.
This thing is over 2,000 years old.
Over 2,000 years old.
It's dated at roughly 100 to 150 BC. So this was, Julius Caesar circa or older.
Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing.
Ancient man was brilliant. There are how many people today could make something like this, especially if you take the computer out of their hand. No calculators.
And what drove this thing so that it continued to...
This was a physical device. So it didn't
So when you put something in place, everything would show according to where it was.
Yeah, so it's kind of like turn the dial and
Yes.
everything else would line up
Yes,
with it.
that's amazing.
Just the artistic skill, the physical skill to put these 30 gears together and mark on them, permanently, etch
Yes.
into the copper, month, date, time, second, minute. It blows the mind. How did they do it? We didn't know that they knew that much. And now we realize they know or knew so much more. Ancient man was brilliant. He wasn't some caveman lugging around a stick, hitting women over the head, who gradually learned things. Ancient man, as far as we know, knew stuff we don't know.
We don't know.
What
we don't know.
All right, so you keep this Antikythera device in mind. Now let me read to you a passage or two of Scripture.
Okay.
Genesis chapter 1. God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons, days, and years." This Antikythera device did that. That's what's so cool about it. ancient man, God said he put the stars in the heaven for us to track time and season with,
Right.
and ancient man could track time and season with it.
Yes.
You and I can't. We've got smart people who can do it for us,
Yes.
but we can't do it. Pretty cool. Job chapter 38 says this, verses 32 through 33. Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? Some translations of Job talk about the constellations of Orion and such, and the Pleiades and the twins. And so ancient man knew significantly more than we give him credit for. In many instances, as I said, more than modern man does today. I do think, though, that we're talking about astronomy. We have to talk about the difference between astronomy and astrology.
Yes.
The Bible speaks of both. Astrology, it condemns.
Yes.
Astronomy, it condones.
Yes. Then what would the difference be between those?
Well, astronomy is studying the stars and their motions in the heavens, trying to understand what eclipses are, what constellations come up at what season. That's astronomy. Astrology is the heavens are deities, and they determine our fates. And if you could just figure them out, you can understand your future. The astrology is the heavens are the deities.
Yes.
Astronomy is we discover what God made in the heavens.
Yes.
Big difference.
There is a big difference.
One is deterministic and divine. The other is part of God's creation.
Yes.
Both of them provide guidance, but biblically, it's guidance that God has given.
Absolutely.
Astrologically, it's the gods, and they control our fates.
Yes.
Very different.
We worship the God who created the stars. We don't worship the stars.
Bingo. That couldn't be said better.
Thanks.
So ancient man, just as brilliant, if not more so, than modern man. Isaac Newton said this. Sir Isaac Newton, a man of God, great scientist, honored to this very day for his contributions to modern science. If I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. We thought he was on the leading edge, but what he said was, no. I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm contributing based on what the brilliant people before me contributed.
Right.
So I want to talk about some of these giants that Newton might have had in mind. Ctesibius was one such brilliant giant. So we're talking 150 to 200 years before the Antikythera device. Ctesibius was 285 BC to 222 BC. So to put that in perspective, ancient Israel was taken into captivity roughly 500 BC. Alexander the Great conquered the world roughly 300 BC. It's 100 years after that. Okay, so Alexander did his thing, 100 years pass. We've got the Ptolemies, the Seleucids. We've got Rome coming out of the mud, the Persians and the Greeks going at it. All these things are going on. Ctesibius was the first to use pressurized air. If it wasn't for Ctesibius, I wouldn't have been able to drive to the studio this morning because we use pressurized air in rubber to help motivate our cars. He's the first that we know of to actually utilize pressurized air. He made the first fire pump. Now, I say he was the first. Maybe he wasn't.
True.
As far as we know, he was the first. But we might dig up and find out Adam did this.
And he stood on the shoulders of giants before him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we know this, that at basically 300 BC to 200 BC, a man named Ctesibius was working with pressurized air. He made a fire pump so that you could, keep using this thing to put out fire. We thought those were modern, right? He made a device that is even, to me, more impressive than the Antikythera device. And it preceded it by more than 100 years. Why was it more impressive? Because it was automatic. The Antikythera device, you set it, and it would tell you everything.
Yes.
His device was a clock that just worked.
The time period for this, it blows my mind that it's so early. We have these incredible, ingenious devices.
The cool thing about it is it was green. It didn't take batteries. You didn't have to plug it
green,
in.
Green technology.
Green technology. It ran, I think, if I'm not mistaken, on running water or something, siphon and moving water. And when one thing would empty, that would suck the other, and it would just go back and forth.
If they needed a battery, they had a battery.
They had batteries. This was a timekeeping device. I've got a picture of it. It's as the hours changed.
Wow, look at that.
The season changed. I mentioned this a little about the Antikythera device. In ancient Egypt, they had shorter hours. So here we are in modern Western civilization. We have daylight savings time. But when all is said and done, we have longer days and shorter days depending on the time of year. In the summer, we might have 12 to 15 hours worth of sunlight. In the winter, 12 to 15 hours of dark. Mm-hmm. What the ancient Egyptians did is they changed their hours. All their hours weren't uniform. They weren't all 60 minutes. So if you have 12 hours in a day, they wanted their hours to line up with the light. So if you had less light, you had shorter hours. If you had more light, you had more longer hours. This device calculated that. So it would keep running, and as you got into winter, the clock would change to correspond with the shorter days. And as you got into summer, it would change to correspond to longer days and keep accurate time throughout all 4 seasons.
Why not? Even the concept of having 60 seconds, 60 minutes, that all comes from Babylon anyways. It's called the sexadecimal system. So it's created by a society. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to run on a 60 seconds, 60 minutes.
Agreed. It's our way. We like it. It works for us.
Yes.
They had their own way.
But they had their own, and it adjusted.
That's the thing that blows
brilliant.
my mind. My pocket watch won't adjust. I set that thing, it just runs. To make a pocket watch, a mechanical one, not
Yeah.
That,
I've heard of those.
You probably have one. that actually changes with the season. That's highly complex.
Yes, very complex.
And we don't have them today.
Yeah, an adjustable one that would automatically change.
You set this thing up in your house, in your castle, in your living room. You pour in some water, and it runs. As far as I know, it runs forever.
Water.
Uh-huh.
Okay, you're shocking me in this one. This is really, really good. Okay, where are we going next?
Well, I want to talk about one of the greatest giants in known history. And I have to say that because he stood on the shoulder of giants too. You've undoubtedly heard of him. Probably the greatest scientist of all time. If I were to assemble a room of scientists and say, give me a list, top 10 of the greatest scientists of all times, I would be totally shocked if he was not on every one of their lists. And he might have the first, second, or third place on every one of their lists.
Are you going to give us the name before the break?
Oh, no.
Oh, you're going to hold it.
It's a cliffhanger.
Okay, so here we are again with another cliffhanger. I can't help it. That's the way Steve is. So you don't want to go away. Get that coffee, come right back, and we'll see you in just a minute.
Greatest scientist of all time.
GLC invites you to visit us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/GLCTV. Here you can stay in touch with all of the latest GLC news along with daily scriptural inspirations, current specials in our bookstore, links to our newest shows, and online media, plus articles from trusted sources. Feel free to drop us a message or a question by posting to our page. Please help us out and like our page by clicking on the thumbs up button. Don't delay, drop by the GLC Facebook page at facebook.com/GLCTV. We want to interact with you today.
Welcome back to Rock, Shovels, and Manuscripts. I'm Rick, and this is Steve, and you left us with another cliffhanger.
I like doing that.
Okay, so what was the question?
Greatest scientist of all time. I said if you got a room of scientists together today and asked them to list the 10 most famous scientists of all times, I would be totally surprised if this man didn't make every one of their lists, and probably at the top of the list for most of them.
Okay, so you had a second to think through this on break. What's your answer?
I forgot.
Do not do that to us. Okay, who would it be?
Archimedes.
Ah,
yeah, Archimedes.
Yeah.
Most people have heard his name,
yes,
but they don't really know the depth of his brilliance. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about some of his contributions to modern society.
Okay.
And I say modern, even though he lived, over 2,000 years ago, same time frame as we had been talking. The things that he invented, discovered, and did are still being used to this day, which means we haven't improved upon them in over 2,000 years.
Wow.
Let me read to you from an article. I'm going to read to you from Wikipedia what it says about Archimedes. Generally considered the greatest mathematician of antiquity and one of the greatest of all time, Archimedes anticipated modern calculus and analysis by applying concepts of infinitesimals and the method of exhaustion to derive and rigorously prove a range of geometrical theorems, including the area of a circle, the surface area and volume of a sphere, and the area under a parabola. Other mathematical achievements include deriving an accurate approximation of pi, defining and investigating the spiral bearing his name, and creating a system using exponentiation of expressing very large numbers. He was also one of the first to apply mathematics to physical phenomena, founding hydrostatics and statics, including an explanation of the principle of the lever. He's credited with designing innovative machines, such as the screw pump, compound pulleys, and defensive war machines to protect his native Syracuse from invasion. Archimedes was amazing.
Brilliant.
He worked in several fields and excelled at them all. And like I said, invented things that we still use today. The pulleys, the sphere, the lever. Archimedes is perhaps most famous for his screw, the Archimedes screw, which is it's an amazing thing when you just think about it.
Yes.
It's a way of pulling water uphill without moving anything uphill by just turning a screw. As you can see, that was a very modern picture.
Yes.
The screw is still being used today. I saw it myself. I took my family on vacation just a couple years ago. We were at California Adventure, right next to Disneyland.
Sure.
There's this huge river raft ride. Probably we had the best time in the park on that ride. They have to take massive amounts of water uphill for the ride so the raft can go through the thing. They use screws to do it. Here we are, modern man, 21st century, and we're using the same way to displace and to move water that Archimedes invented over 2,000 years ago.
Wow.
I think he's the one being credited with, give me a big enough lever and I will move the world. He was just brilliant. The theories. Pi? Who doesn't use pi today?
What if there's ancient patents that he's just waiting to sue one day?
He would own the world based on his lawsuit.
Yeah, for sure.
Beneficial discoveries and also weapons of war. He invented this claw. We're not sure how it worked. There's some old depictions of it, but we don't think they're accurate. But they're talked about. The idea was this. A weapon would be somehow hanging from a castle wall. A ship would come in to attack, and this claw would flip the ship over. It would somehow grab the ship using levers and pulleys and would capsize it. Could you imagine? You're just attacking Syracuse, and all of a sudden this device you'd never seen before totally capsizes your warship? When they went after Syracuse, they were told, don't kill Archimedes. I don't remember who it was, Alexander the Great's forebear, whoever it was. They recognized that this man was a treasure. He was brilliant. And even though he was devising weapons to defeat the very enemies, the enemy leader was saying, take the city, but don't kill Archimedes. Unfortunately, he died in the war. Imagine what else he might have invented.
Wow.
He is actually credited with making a laser beam. We are just now, in modern warfare, developing laser beams.
Right.
Heat
With
ray?
the focus of light?
Yeah. They didn't call it a laser beam. They called it a heat ray or a death ray. But somehow he was able to focus the beams of the sun onto ships and catch them on fire. People today have tried to replicate it and have not been able to do it. So that leads some to say it's myth. He didn't really do it.
Not necessarily.
I just think he was smarter than we are. He knew how to do it, and we don't.
A death ray.
Yes, a death ray.
I love
A
this.
space age word
I
or
love
phrase from over 2,200 years ago. Archimedes was brilliant. So, we're talking about ancient technology. Besides it being exciting and fun, my whole premise is to contradict the prevailing theory that came to us out of evolution, that ancient man was primitive. Over time, he learned and progressed. He learned language. He learned fire. He made a wheel. He eventually learned from cave painting to real painting, from primitive artistry to, complex artistry up to modern man. That's the evolutionary process.
And if that were even true, then we would be so much more ethical and moral today if we were progressing and becoming so much better.
You would expect us to progress ethically as well as intellectually.
Yes, you would.
And yet the Bible says both of those things. First of all, it says that man did not progress from ignorance to intelligence, that first man was highly intelligent. So much so that ancient man has done things we don't know how he did them. Cities were born within the lifetime of Adam. Musical instruments, iron and copper were worked with. So ancient man wasn't primitive. And as for morality, the Bible tells us that man is broken, that we cannot improve morally, that we are corrupt, that there's no way that we'll ever get better. So even though we can make bigger and better things
on our own,
yes, we need the salvation that Jesus provides. Yes. He can fix us. We can't fix ourselves. All we can do is make bigger and better bombs, which we're doing, which we've done.
Death rays, bigger and better death rays.
Bigger and better death rays, yes. So I was talking about Alexander the Great. He was considered, and there was a legend about him being invincible, not only because he conquered the entire Mediterranean world and was a brilliant general.
Yes.
God was also with him. There's a recording in Josephus of how God told him to move east, and he would bless him and allow him to conquer the east. And that's when he headed over and conquered the Middle East, including Israel. So he had a vision. And the vision was verified and backed up by the high priest and his entourage in Israel, in Jerusalem. Story for another day. But he was considered invincible. But what most people don't know is he wore armor. But not the kind of armor like the Knights of England wore.
Big, clunky, heavy.
No, this was light, flexible, similar to modern day bulletproof vests.
Okay.
It would be more akin to that than Middle Age armor. And his armor, his design was replicated in modern times and tested, and they shot an arrow at it, and it stopped the arrow. The arrow might have gone in an inch or two. But so imagine you're on the ancient battlefield, and you get arrows hitting you all day long, and they're bouncing off or sticking in, and nothing's happening. He was considered invincible.
Yeah.
Because of ancient technology. He was wearing Kevlar. It wasn't really Kevlar. Ancient Kevlar. He was bulletproof.
Ancient death rays, ancient Kevlar.
Ancient computers, ancient batteries.
Ancient batteries.
They had everything. I told you off screen, I wouldn't be surprised if they dug up an ancient airplane. I just wouldn't be surprised.
You know, the modern phrase, there's an app for that. I think it was probably, that was probably coined, 200 years before Messiah came. Who knows?
Nothing's new under the sun. So I told you previously, the battery thrilled me. The pyramid thrills me. The Antikythera device thrills me. Ancient ships thrill me. I had mentioned in a previous episode, one of the arguments about the great flood of Noah was there couldn't possibly have been ships that big back in those days. And they based that on their evolutionary worldview that ancient man was primitive and modern man is smarter. But if you don't hold to that and you look at the facts, you will see that we have unearthed through documents and through digging, through archaeology, ancient ships that make Noah's ship look totally plausible. So I want to take a couple moments to talk about ships.
Okay.
I see I'm running out of time. Oh, but this is so wonderful. So historian Usher mentions a ship of 8 tiers, 8-story ship. Each tier had 100 rowers per side. So we're talking 1,600 rowers.
Amazing.
On a ship mentioned by the historian Usher. In addition to the 1,600 rowers, were 1,200 fighting men. So this was a battleship of their day. The ship had to be at least 400 and 500 to 500 feet long. Remember, Noah's Ark was about 450 feet long. So we have written evidence that has nothing to do with Bible or a Bible ship about an ancient ship that's just as long as Noah's Ark. There's a model of it. I've got it for you right here. Not that one, but of a similar one. This one goes from the 2nd to the 3rd century. It speaks of a warship that contained, are you ready? 40 tiers of rowers.
That's amazing.
40 tiers of rowers. That's 4,000 rowers.
Wow.
It would have taken 400 sailors to handle the rigging and the sails. 2,850 men in arms for a total of 7,250 men. An ancient ship that had over 7,000 men on it. An aircraft carrier. Do you have any idea how many people are on an aircraft carrier today?
No.
5,000 something.
Wow.
So if you were to put this ship next to an aircraft carrier, this ancient ship would have had more men on it than an aircraft carrier. Now, of course, they didn't have jets to carry around and helicopters to carry around. But to give you an idea of scope and size and scale, 40 tiers of rowers. It's just insane. From some of these ancient ships, they had a lot of rowers so they could go fast because they actually used the ships as battering rams. They've dug up some of the battering ram tips as are shown here on the screen.
Some serious damage.
Yeah, so this would be on some wood, and there might be 1, 2, 3 of these sticking out in front of a ship. They'd get these 400, 500, 600 rowers, or how many there were, to go as fast as they could and to ram a vessel. They would punch a big honking hole in it and sink the vessel and the battle.
I hope you're learning as much as we are about the ancient world and how incredible God has laid out this plan of salvation for us today. He's always had a plan for man, even ancient man. We hope that you'll join us next week as we learn more from rocks, from shovels, and from manuscripts.
This episode was produced by and for God's Learning Channel. If you're enjoying this series, your financial support will help us keep this program on the air. Simply send your contribution to God's Learning Channel, P.O. Box 61,000, Midland, Texas 79711-1000, or log on to our website at www.glc.us.com and donate using PayPal. Please be sure to designate which program your contribution is intended to support. Thank you for helping us make unique quality programming a reality.
Order your copy of this program from the GLC bookstore by calling the numbers or visiting the website on your screen. Please include the program number when ordering.